Brendan O'Connor, let's start with manufacturing. It's a $1.5 billion plan to cushion the blow of the pandemic recession. What is Labor's position on this?
Well, we support anything that might provide opportunities for our manufacturers to grow. But frankly, this is the plan for a 10-year plan. It is not going to provide sufficient support. And as your colleague said, at a time when the government is ripping $1.8 billion out of research and development, which is to help our local manufacturers, it's a pretty empty promise to suggest that there's going to be $1.5 billion initiative, because you're giving with one hand and taking with the other. And until the government confirms that they're going to back down on their legislation that's currently before the Parliament to rip away $1.8 billion from R&D, then I think this announcement is very cynical. So they have to confirm that, and the government, and obviously the Prime Minister chose not to answer the question today, but he will need to answer it, or the Treasurer will need to answer whether in fact the legislation they're seeking to enact, currently in the Parliament, is going to be withdrawn. Then we could take more seriously the initiative that we've heard today.
Yeah, it was something that the Prime Minister was strong on, saying that nothing will be announced until Tuesday. I want to ask you about these 6 key sectors that have been identified as part of this manufacturing announcement. Do you agree that these are the specific areas where we do have a competitive advantage?
I certainly agree with the 6, because if you look at the Labor plan in 2012, which we actually had in place, all 6 were identified. And then the current government abolished that plan in 2014 in the 2014 budget. So, if you like, 8 years after Labor sought to enact it, the government's trying to revitalise it. So to that extent, of course, we agree with the initiative and the areas they're focusing upon, because they are the areas the former Labor government identified and was seeking to do something about 8 years ago.
Do you agree, though, that we have become, I guess, less reliant on places like China, and that we need to keep making things here in Australia to kickstart our economic recovery?
I absolutely do. I think we've really neglected manufacturing for too many years. Our manufacturing sector has shrunk faster than any OECD country over the last decade, and the government has been pulling support away from car makers, support away from manufacturers. Any support that they're deciding to put back in to help the sector, of course, we'll support. And yes, we need to do better. The pandemic has exposed the terrible decision by the Morrison government not to support manufacturing, because we're getting supply chain shocks as a result of the global pandemic. So if it's taken a pandemic to convince the Morrison government to actually support manufacturing, of course Labor welcomes it. But at the moment, we have a $1.5 billion spend and a $1.8 billion cut. Until that's reconciled, we can't support the government's approach to supporting manufacturing, because its words are hollow, frankly.
I just want to ask you about industrial relations. The Prime Minister today saying that it's something that they're still keen to work on to reform the industrial relations system. It did appear that this is still a key part of his agenda. Brendan O'Connor, we know that there's been a breakdown in communications recently, particularly between business and unions. How confident are you that there will be a resolution on this?
Look, I think with respect to industrial relations, it's always a tough area of reform. If there's genuine consultation and a genuine attempt to find mutual benefits for workers and businesses, then there'll be some progress. If it's an attempt just to support businesses by cutting labour costs and cutting wages and cutting employment security, I think there's going to be resistance, and that's understandable. People are feeling that work is insecure, and they're feeling that, in part, the pandemic has exposed the insecure nature of work. And so it depends on what the government's seeking to do. If they're looking to find mutual benefits, then I think there can be some progress. If it's about a wage cutting or making work more insecure, then I think there's going to be no consensus, and certainly Labor won't stand by and watch workers lose wages or lose employment security.